Limerence by devdevlin, read by Ella Mabella. 6. After his meeting with Dumbledore that afternoon, Tom is in no mood for his students. Dumbledore had not been subtle. While the rest of the professors might adore him and take anything from him as fact, Dumbledore has, on no occasion, made him feel like a trustworthy member of staff. In this meeting, he'd made it plainly obvious that his opinion of Tom has not changed. "Perhaps to find the culprit, we need look inwards." "Inwards," he said. "Inwards." The other professors had not heard it, but he had, and he'd heard it loud and clear. Dumbledore did not mean inwards, as in considering the students, as the others had assumed. No, not inwards as in considering the stuff, but inwards as in those present there and then, in his damn office, in that damn meeting. Tom's fists tighten. Dumbledore suspects. Professor Dumbledore will figure it out, even without me. Professor Dumbledore will figure it out, even without me. Professor Dumbledore will figure it out, even without me. It is maddening. Tom had restrained from releasing the basilisk for years. He'd itched in his 5th year, he'd longed in his 6th, and he'd almost done it in his 7th. But despite the overwhelming temptation, he'd still restrained. And yet, even after 13 years of restraint, and nothing but perfect behavior, Dumbledore still did not trust him. Nothing had ever been enough to sway him, and so Tom had restrained no more. He has no proof, Tom knows. Aside from Miss Granger, he left no proof to find, and there is nothing the old man can do to prove it. But nonetheless, he suspects, and it is maddening. Maddening as the increasing numbers in the impure. Maddening as the continued secrecy of Wizarding World. Maddening as is she, his anomaly, his own personal tormentor. He closes his eyes and stops himself. She's nothing. She's brilliant and she's foolish, and despite what she knows, despite what she's seen, Miss Granger is nothing. She's a teenage mudblood with a nose big enough to gouge eyes with, and she is less than nothing. He will handle Dumbledore. He will be difficult to sway, and he will need someone to take the blame for Warren's murder, but still, he will handle Dumbledore. She will soon be gone. Dumbledore will not figure it out, and bright shining Miss Granger will be wrong. Miss Granger is nothing, and yet, when she arrives at his classroom at 3:59, trailing closely behind Weasley and Potter, he does not particularly mind the sight of her. "Here, sir," Potter says when they reach his desk, offering up his essay on unbreakable vows. Tom takes it and looks down at it only briefly before Weasley says, "Wrote it all on my own, Professor," and hands his over too. Miss Granger doesn't say anything, merely handing him a wad of folded parchment she'd pulled from her bag. "Thank you, Weasley, Potter, Granger." She does not meet his eyes, and so Tom glances at the clock. "Considering you've technically entered on time, I won't take any marks, though next time might I advise you meet the deadline with something more tangible than the length of Weasley's attention span. You should have your marks by Wednesday." "Yes, sir," grumbles Weasley. "Thanks, Professor." Potter looks to be fighting a smile. Miss Granger is silent. He waves them off, and the three of them scarper as hastily as they arrive. Tom doesn't give in to the temptation to immediately look at hers, knowing that if he were to start, he wouldn't be able to finish reading before his next class arrives. Instead, he adds the essay to the growing pile on his desk. He looks back up at the sound of trailing footsteps to see that Miss Granger has stopped in the doorway. When she turns back to look, features guarded, he smiles. She returns it with a scowl, and then she's gone. Tom stays up late that night, marking the 7th-year essays, and it is tedious. It is still an effort to restrain himself from flicking through them to find hers, but he manages, instead using it as motivation to continue and marking them in the order by which they've been handed to him. Eventually, he reaches Potter's familiar sloppy handwriting. The essay gives him the beginnings of a headache, and he scrawls a neat 10 in the upper corner by his name. He reaches Weasley's. Tom stops reading 2 paragraphs from the end and writes a tight 7 in the corner, underlined by a "See me after class." And then he lifts Weasley's off of the pile and reaches Granger's essay. His fingertips are hot when he unfolds it, and at the very same moment that he does, a sudden low gurgling escapes from his throat before he even realizes it. It is the shortest essay she's ever handed him. As he continues to stare at it, his gurgle becomes a laugh, and then he laughs, and he laughs. It is 2 words long. It is only 2 words long, but those 2 words ignite something in him that is tight and hot and foreign, and he doesn't think he can contain it. "Fuck you!" He puts the parchment down to pull at the skin of his face. He closes his eyes, and she has surprised him. Strong-willed, foolish Miss Granger has again surprised him, and she is just EXTRAORDYNARY. His fingertips are burning now, thrumming with something that borders on excitement. He takes up his quill once more and writes a neat 15 in the upper corner of the page. Then he stops his grading for the night and goes to have a long, cold shower. 7. The first thing Tom does when his 7th years re-enter his classroom is hand them back their essays. He does so slowly, one by one, taking his time with each student, just so that when he reaches her desk, he will be able to see the look on her face. "Miss Granger." She looks up at him, and she looks guilty. And when he hands her her parchment, she sheepishly takes it from him. He remains where he is, watching as she opens it, and at once her eyes widen. All traces of guilt vanish, and she looks up from her grade to stare at him with accusation and horror and fury. When Tom speaks, it is low and just for her. "Well done, Miss Granger. Some of your best work yet." And for the entire remainder of the class, he sees as she boils in her seat. That evening, Miss Granger enters his office behind the classroom without knocking, and when she does, she brings a storm with her. She's a mess. She's irate and ruffled, and she is beautiful. The only greeting she gives is in the slamming of her palm down upon his desk, a graded sheet of parchment scrunching beneath her fingers. "What is this?" Tom stares, drinking her in. Brilliant, foolish, beautiful Miss Granger. "Could you close the door, Miss Granger?" Is this a bribe?" In her voice are tremors. "If you think that I would, great will not buy my silence." He sighs and flicks his wrist, and the door swings shut behind her. Then he pushes his chair back, creating a distance between himself and his desk, between himself and her. "I was under no impression that they would." "It's what?" "I didn't give you full marks for your obedience, Miss Granger," he clarifies. Her eyebrows draw together, her nostrils still twitching with her anger. "Then why?" "I suppose I gave you the marks as a show of respect." He shrugs. "For years, like most, I believed when trouble found you that Potter and Weasley were to blame. But your behavior lately, what you wrote as an essay, that's who you are, isn't it? Who you really are." What are you? That's nonsense." "You hide, Miss Granger." He leans his body slightly forward, closer to her. "You hide in plain sight. You are good. I don't deny that. You're an innocent. But there's something more, isn't there? Something that others don't see. Something in you that doesn't merely want perfect scores and perfect record. It wants more. It doesn't want to hide behind them. It doesn't want to be contained. He rises now, and he circles towards her, and for once she does not retreat. You hide in plain sight, just like me. But you showed me, and now I see you. She blinks rapidly, and the side of her nose is raised half a skull. I am nothing like you. The defense in her tone has him smiling. You are everything like me. You murderer, she spits. I am nothing. He strikes. He grips her shoulders tightly, roughly, pushing her back so that her legs collide with his desk. And though she gapes, he can feel her muscles contracting through her clothing. She makes no attempt to run. Fuck you, you told me. He leans in closer, and his voice is low. That's what you wrote, and it was honest, wasn't it? You were honest. You were finally unapologetically yourself, weren't you? That must have taken a great deal of courage to be so honest with me. He sees the beginning of tears pooling in her eyes, but behind them the fire still lingers. Yes, she sniffs. You saw me. You saw what I did to her. I wouldn't have chosen for you to see that, but you did. And I was forced to be honest with you, and now I want you to continue what we've started. Be honest with me, he says. Hermione. Her lip quivers. You're angry with me, he says, questioning. You're furious? She makes a single stiff nod. Seeing me, seeing what I did, that hurt you? Another nod. I hurt you. This time, when she nods, it is accompanied by a slight whimper. You trusted me, and I broke that trust. You looked up to me, you admired me, you even, well, you liked me, didn't you? You had a perception of me built up in your head that didn't align with what you saw me do, and now you feel like that. Like I've been taken from you, don't you? She doesn't respond, and the only movement she makes is in the bobbing of her throat. But then, a nod. He breathes outward gently through his nose. I'm sorry, he murmurs. When she blinks, a tear rolls down her cheek. He releases her shoulders, wiping the tear away with his thumb, and the skin of her cheek is soft and warm, like silk. Why did you do it? She whispers, and another tear breaks free. Why did you? He cups her cheek now, his other hand mirroring the gesture, and when she does not move, he leans down and rests his forehead on hers. I'm sorry, he repeats. She was a student. Her voice cracks. She was. Couldn't you just make me forget? Oh. He strokes her cheeks with his thumb, soothing. No, I would never do that. Please. She grips his form. I don't want to know anymore. Please. No. He moves his hand downward, down over her jaw, his fingers resting on the skin of her neck. No, I've seen you, Miss Granger. I have no desire to see you go. She pulls back, but only slightly. What? The skin on her forehead is wrinkled. Her eyes drift back and forth between his. She is confused, and they are so close now, and he cannot help it. He glances down to her lips, and it is his throat that is bobbing now. She moves before him, and she brings her hand to splay on his chest. They are small and fragile, and though his robes are beneath, the skin below where she touches is hot and bothered, and he cannot help it when he leans in. What are you doing? She is small and fragile, and yet, when she pushes him back, it is with enough force to create some distance between them. She wipes at her cheeks, and they are red. In her eyes, there is understanding there, and they are horrified. I don't... She clenches her eyes closed, and when she wrenches them open, she is determined. "You will pay for what you have done. You're a monster, and they will figure you out. And you disgust me, and I want nothing to do with you." When she leaves, she slams the door behind her, and though she is gone, the storm she'd brought with her lingers in the office. It is hot, and it is thick, and she is beautiful. And as he drags his nails down over his face, he doesn't think he can breathe. He wants to follow her. He wants to chase her like he did that night and wrap his hands around her neck and finish what he should have done then. But she is a distraction. She is nothing, but she is brilliant, and she is beautiful, and she is extraordinary. And he doesn't think he can finish it. Not anymore, and he hates her. He does not follow her. Tom does not forget the feel of her. She is small and fragile, and warm and soft, and he will never forget it. Her face between his hands, her forehead against his, her hands on his chest. He cannot stop thinking about it, and the relief his hand brings him that night is no relief at all. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Limerence by devdevlin, read by LMX Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.